Our next DevOps visionary works as a senior technology architect with Infosys and has been speaking at the DOIS from the very first edition. He has around 20 years of experience in software delivery, design and architecture, cloud automation, DevOps consulting, and competency development. He has helped global organizations design and implement their IT systems and digital transformation strategies. And now he's all set to share his ideas on intelligence risk and compliance management solutions for multi-cloud environment. Without much further delay, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Senthil Kumar Shanmugam.
This is Senthil Kumar Shanmugam, Senior Architect from Infosys. I have around 20 years of experience in IT industry, and I'm very happy to be part of Devops India Summit 2020 event. So in this event, I will be presenting on topic intelligent risk and compliance management for multi-cloud environment. So this is the agenda which I will be talking today. First, we'll be seeing about cloud security, the industry analysis, and we will be seeing basically multi-cloud security key challenges and the key expectations for a multi-cloud security. And next, we'll be seeing managing security risk in an enterprise. And next will be on the Devsecops, the key enabler to risk and compliance management in the cloud. And next, we will be covering on MultiCloud Devsecops Automation. And next, we'll be focusing on multi-cloud considerations while enhancing cloud security. And last, we'll be focusing on the multi-cloud key benefits and learnings. So this is the agenda for today. And I'll be moving to the next slide. Yeah. So I just want to set the context before I go into my presentation. So cloud computing offers scalability, flexibility, elasticity, right? And also cost savings, right? Because it gives a lot of flexibility to the end users to consume cloud services, right? But also on the other hand, there is a growing risk of security and compliance challenges, which the organizations are facing in a day-to-day world. So this is the context I want to set, and I will move to my subsequent slides. Yeah. So first, we'll be seeing about the cloud security industry analysis. So what industry leaders like Gartner is suggesting about the cloud security. So the first interesting part is through 2022, at least 95% of cloud security failures will be the fault of the organization. So that's what one of the Gartner reports says, right? And the next Gartner report, which is very interesting, which says that through 2025, 90% of the enterprises which fails to control public cloud will use or will share the sensitive data to outside world. So hence, from this industry analysis, what we come to know is that cloud security and compliance is the key. And even if customers are going towards a multi-cloud, the risk of handling cloud security and compliance has to be remediated at a very initial stage. Okay. In my next slide, I would like to cover multi-cloud security, the key challenges in a multi-cloud environment, right? So the first major point is about access and permissions. In this, we will be focusing on how multi-cloud adds further complexities to existing identity and access management. So take a typical scenario where a customer is using Azure and Google Cloud for their enterprise business. And they have to maintain the access, permissions, and security for their employees and for their end users, right? So it adds further complexity for their identity and access management. So that is one of the major challenges what enterprises are facing today. So the next aspect is on the cost. So customers have moved towards cloud and they are using huge amount of services, like it can be an infrastructure as a service or a platform as a service or even a software as a service. So now we also hear many times from customer that they want to optimize the cloud cost usage, right? So this is one of the major aspects which needs to be addressed. So a lot of startups and a lot of companies have invested in optimizing the cloud cost, how to basically optimize cloud cost in a multi-cloud scenario. The third interesting aspect is the patching and the upgrades, right? So in patching and upgrades, basically what we'll be covering is how critical is patching and upgrades from one cloud service provider to another in case of a multi-cloud scenario, right? So you will be using the same Linux based AMI image, right? So how the patches and upgrades for the OS is getting upgraded by the respective cloud providers, right? So that is one of the very critical aspect. And the next point is about the lack of comprehensive and unified multi-cloud security view, right? So we are using multi-cloud services today. Like for example, I can use a Azure function, or I can use a AWS Lambda or Google Cloud Run, right? But as a whole, at a holistic level, right? How multi-cloud security is providing me the ability for giving a unified view, like how these services are running, right? And what is the usage, right? And how secure they are. So this particular view, we are not getting very clearly from multi-cloud service providers. So we are moving towards some third-party companies or industry leaders who provide this kind of a view. And the last is about very critical, which is on the application vulnerabilities and the varied configurations. So here we talk about how applications which are hosted in the cloud, right, where the security testing has not taken place at a very initial stage, how they are very how they are having a risk at the very initial stages of the application, right? So here we'll be talking about the key security risks in applications which was not done at a very early stage. Instead, they went and hosted in the cloud. So what are the critical vulnerabilities or the critical risks what the enterprise might face if the security risks was not handled at a very initial stage? So these are the key challenges in a multi-cloud security for the multi-cloud environment. Yeah. So when I talk about multi-cloud security, these are the 9 key expectations which any enterprise should be having in place. So I'll start with first. The first one is identity and access management. So in identity and access management, we talk about 4 major points, which is basically context-aware zero trust security. And next is basically integrating with enterprise active directories instead of having multiple active directories and managing it, right? And third is single sign-on and multi-factor authentication, which is very critical. Now, instead of having multiple username and passwords for multiple apps across the enterprise, so how SSO and MFA basically gives a very unified and strong experience for enterprise to manage this. And last is about customers, users, and partner identity context, right? So I'll move to the next point, which is on application and data protection. So in this application and data protection, we will be seeing more towards how to implement tagging for cloud services. There are multiple cloud services which will be created, like thousands of cloud services in enterprise production environment we will have. So it is very important to tag these cloud services so we know exactly it is being created for which unit or for which division or for which project, so that we can get an aggregation of the services. And next is basically the identification of data assets in the cloud as well. That's one of the very key aspects. And the third important aspect in this category is about how to store the passwords, secrets in a very secured way, which is provided by the cloud service provider. So key vaults, encryption, and data masking are some of the key aspects which can be used by enterprises to handle application and data protection. And last is about the endpoint protection. So this is one of the very common scenarios where the enterprises are hosting their APIs or microservices, right? So how secure are their endpoints? How much protected they are? So this is one of the very important aspect, because if this is compromised, the APIs or the applications will be vulnerable as well. The third important block is on the Devsecops. As everybody knows, so Devsecops is very critical for Devops automation. So here we talk about 3 major areas. One is static application security testing, and next is dynamic application security testing, and third is runtime application service protection. So when we say static application service protection, right? So here we focus more towards how your source code, artifacts, and a very early stage during a build stage, how we are doing security analysis, what are the key security tools you are integrating to eliminate risk at a early stage, and how you are using the artifacts, right? For example, if you are using artifact repository or artifactory, so how you are doing a scanning of your artifactory in the artifact repository. And the third important aspect is secured application architecture assessments. So here we focus more on the application architecture assessments, which will basically designed for security. And the last is about application testing, which is using DAST. So this is a scenario where you host your application in a web server. So once it is hosted, you test using DAST to see how secure the application is, right? So whether you undergo any cross-site scripting attack, or whether the application HTTP request can be intercepted by a third-party hacker, right? So those kind of testing will be primarily taken care in DAST. The next major area where we want to cover is infrastructure security. Under infrastructure security, there are 5 major aspects. So first, I'll talk about infrastructure as a code protection. In infrastructure as a code, basically the whole infra automation scripts are kept in our code. Like for example, a Terraform or a Cloud Formation for AWS or ARM template for Azure, right? So how these code are kept in a secured environment. Like for example, if you are putting in a source control repository, how secure the code is. If a third-party hacker gets access to this place, which is kept unprotected, so what is the risk what the enterprise will undergo, right? So IAC protection is one of the very key aspect, and if the code is kept in a ACM repository, like a GitHub or any other standard ACM tools, so how secure the IAC is, right? And next is basically the vulnerability scanning. So we have to perform the vulnerability scanning basically for identifying the potential vulnerabilities at a very early stage of the DevOps lifecycle. And next is basically compliance scanning as well. So compliance is one of the key aspects because a lot of enterprises operate in different geographies and different regions and different segments of the world, right? So each and every region has their compliance baked in, right? So how much compliance is your application and data with respect to the different regions? So the compliance scanning is very much important as well. And the operating system and server protection is also one of the key aspects of infrastructure security. Because if your OS patches or if your OS upgrades or even if your server upgrades are compromised, there is a strong risk of the system getting hacked, right? And last is the micro-segmentation. So this is one of the very interesting concepts where you can segment on a specific groups as well. So these are the points which are put together, which makes your infrastructure security as a very strong area. The next is on the container security. So here basically we focus on 2 major topics. One is on container vulnerability scanning, and next is container runtime security. So containers, when we say a Docker image, when it is getting built along with the application packaged with the dependencies, right? So there can be potential vulnerabilities because we tend to use a lot of time open source tools and components, right? So this in turn can have a potential vulnerability in it. So it is very important when you are going for a containerized approach, you should be having a container vulnerability scanning done as a mandatory option in your DevOps lifecycle. And next, very important aspect is the container runtime security. So when the container is basically deployed to a container orchestrator and when the containers are in action, right? So at a runtime, what are all the key container runtime security aspects which you are want to focus? So that is the next area. These 2 combined together will make your container ecosystem much more stronger. And next category is artifact security. Many of the enterprises are using Artifactory, right? So this is basically to store your Docker images or for storing your application artifacts. So here, it is very important to scan your artifacts, what goes in and what goes out, right? So it's very important to scan application artifacts in Artifactory and the dependencies of the application as well, because they might contain security risks, right? And I will move to the next point, which is on the monitoring and solution security. So this monitoring solution security is one of the very interesting concepts where a lot of startups have started investing in AI and ML based threat detection and protection capability, right? So it studies your past data, it studies your past application details which is hosted on the cloud, and it based on the past data, it on the given algorithm, right, it predicts the threat detections, what can come in the future. So this is one of the very interesting area where enterprises are looking forward for investing in. And the next important aspect is the continuous compliance. So continuous compliance is something like it should happen continuously over a period of time, right? It's not one-time activity which you do once in a year or twice in a year and then sit, right? So basically, we should have automated compliance check for cloud services, which will always give basically the potential compliance risks which the enterprises has to address. And the last point is about cloud workload and gateway security. So many times we work on the cloud workloads. Sometimes we migrate the apps from on-premise to a cloud service provider areas, right? So during that time, how much cloud workload security is given consideration? And the other important aspect is the cloud gateway security, right? So we often use application gateways in cloud. So there are a lot of aspects involved in configuring a secured cloud gateway security, right, for the enterprises. So these are the 9 critical points for the multi-cloud security. Yeah. So this is one of the typical view which I want to give about how enterprises are managing security risks, right? So I'll just start from the right-hand side part. So the right-hand side part is your typical information security group, right? So basically they do incident management, they do response management, and they try to define the security practices for the enterprises, right? And what will also happen is that they might have a smaller group which will basically focus on the threat intelligence or threat prevention or even like a threat detection, right? So smaller group focusing. Basically, these are the threats which are coming mostly from external risks. And they also focus on the threats which can come from the internal apps which are hosted within on-premise as well. And the middle block is one of the very key aspects where any organization will have these primary setups. So one is basically employees, and next is the area where your apps, APIs, containers, and data reside. And the third category is the network and infrastructure. And the fourth is your identity and keys, how they are kept secured in an enterprise, right? So these 4 basically primarily will be managed by the app teams and as well as your IT operations teams, right? So putting all these together. So let's start from employees, right? So how much we are educating the employees with respect to the security awareness. That is one of the very key aspects. And next, when it comes to apps, APIs, containers, and data, right? So it is very important for the development teams to be aware of the latest security risks which is happening in the industry, and how much of applications and APIs are getting scanned from their DevOps pipelines. If there is any loophole here, the IT teams has to recommend to implement security best practices in their DevOps automation. And third category is the network and infrastructure. So here we focus mainly on the core network and infrastructure security, which has to be implemented by the network and infrastructure team. And the next is basically the endpoint security. So as we discussed, how APIs or apps and microservices which are hosted within on-premise, so how secure they are, what are the endpoint securities which are configured by your enterprises, right? And last is about identity and keys. So how the passwords, secrets, and other important credentials are stored within enterprise in a very confidential way. So that's about the key management, right? So the below block represents a typical DevOps automation cycle where the application teams will be using a common platform within an organization to do a DevOps automation, build and a deployment, right? And they may be using the standard testing tools like a functional testing, security testing, right? And they may use containers as well to basically package their applications, right? So it's a complete ecosystem where the individual employees, the respective application teams, and the app owners, and the IT operations team, and the security team, right, should work jointly in making a complete DevOps ecosystem in enterprise more successful. So if you see on the left-hand side part, there are two more teams which are involved. That is basically the IRM team, which we call it as Information Risk Management team, where they primarily define the policy and standards on a periodic basis. And next is basically the technical risk management team. So this is more about focusing on certain aspects, right? Like starting from a data loss protection or a storage security, a license compliance, access management, compliance and reporting, right? And also the architecture and risk assessments. So every application which is basically created, designed, architected within an enterprise should get approvals on all these areas from a technical risk management team. Otherwise, applications will tend to have security vulnerabilities or compliance issues or license issues, right? So in order to avoid this, all these teams put together, starting from information risk management, technical risk management, the whole ecosystem of employees who are part of basically the app teams and the IT operations team should work in a very coordinated way so that the whole enterprise risk has been completely managed by all the stakeholders. Yeah. In this slide, basically, I want to focus on the Devsecops, which is a key enabler for the risk and compliance automation in cloud. So I had covered around 8 key points, which I felt is basically the key enabler from a Devsecops point of view for the managing risk and compliance in the multi-cloud environment. So first is basically microservices architecture for a multi-cloud environment. So for example, if you want to host for my application APIs and as well as my backend APIs in 2 different cloud environments, right? So how from a DevSecOps approach, I can manage a very secured communication of the REST API calls, right? And how my microservices architecture is defined. Anyways, the communication will happen through REST APIs, but anyways, how secured they are. That is the first point about how secured are your APIs in a multi-cloud environment. So the next is on the very critical aspect for the infrastructure as a code for multi-cloud service provisioning. So how the services are provisioned through infrastructure as a code, right? Sometimes we provision multi-cloud services through the IAC script using Terraform, right? So how secured they are via REST APIs, right? And third is basically the security policies. The security policies as a code is one of the very latest concepts where you define the security policies in the system. So not only security policies, the infrastructure configuration, security policies, everything can be put as a code for the multi-cloud environment, and it can be much more secured as well. And the next point is about configuration as a code. So how your configuration management, which was done as a manual activity, can be configured as a code for setting up multi-cloud environment from a DevSecOps point of view. And I just move to the below points. How to have a secured DevSecOps for a multi-cloud CI/CD automation, right? So this is one of the typical example where I will host my application in Azure Web Apps, and then I'll host my APIs in AWS, right? So in such kind of a multi-cloud environment, how basically secured my DevSecOps cycle is, right? And the next point is very important because there should be a continuous compliance which should be defined in the system, which takes care of apps and data with respect to the respective geographies where the applications are getting hosted, right? And the next point is about intelligent monitoring and logging for multi-cloud services. So here we focus about there will be huge amount of logs which will be generated in a multi-cloud environment. So how intelligently we can generate those logs, parse the logs, analyze the logs, and then we can give intelligent predictions based on the logs what we arrive at. And the last point is about automated event management and response. So this is more about how basically we can give an automated event management response in case of a security incident instead of a manual intervention. So these are the 8 key enablers to risk and compliance in the cloud from a DevSecOps point of view. Yeah. So this specific slide talks about a multi-cloud DevSecOps automation. So if you see from the left-hand side, So starting from the initial stages where a developer is basically making a code commit into a SCM repository like Git. So tools like Crucible, which can be used for the code reviews, right? Which gives a lot of value add at a very, very early stage of the development lifecycle for a developer, right? So the moment code gets committed into a SCM repository, so when I talk about the continuous integration cycle, like I can integrate multiple tools to ensure my application and the artifacts are much, much secured in my CI stage. So for example, here in this diagram, you are seeing Sonar Cube for basically code inspection. So then we have also put here HP45, which is Micro Focus now, Micro Focus 45 SAST. This is for static application security testing. And Black Duck more from a open source compliance testing as well, right? In case if open source code is been referred in your application, so it's very mandate for you to do the Black Duck compliance check as well. And when we are containerizing it using Docker, so it's very important that we also use tools like CLAR, which does the container vulnerability scanning as well at a very early stage of your CI. So most of the security risks will get remediated in the CI cycle itself, right? So once we move to the next area, which is on the continuous delivery, once your application gets hosted and deployed to a web server, so there, how this dynamic application security testing, DAST, comes into picture, and whatever runtime events happening during accessing the application, if there are any security loopholes or vulnerabilities, how SAST can basically give the potential risks which can be addressed by the app teams. So in the end, the whole objective is when I move a application code to a production environment, I will be very sure that most of the security risks will be taken care at a very early stage of the development lifecycle. And I'll have a secured production with very, very minimal downtime. So that's the whole objective of this. Okay. So this slide talks about multi-cloud considerations for enhancing cloud security. So there are 5 major areas which I want to touch upon basically in terms of multi-cloud considerations while enhancing the cloud security. The first being container monitoring and security, right? So as we've seen in the previous slides, container monitoring and security is a key aspect because it contains of 2 major areas. One is container vulnerability scanning during your initial CI builds, and next is basically when you deploy your container images and to a container orchestration platform and when container starts running. So container runtime security. So these 2 are 2 major areas which should be taken care. And the next area is about multi-cloud services provisioning, right? So most of the enterprises are using IAC for basically provisioning multi-cloud services from a DevOps pipeline, right? So during this multi-cloud service provisioning, so how secured is the IAC code? Is there any username and password which has been hard-coded into it? Or is there any potential security risks embedded in the IAC code? So that has to be reviewed thoroughly and it has to be much more secure. And the third important aspect is the multi-cloud security asset itself, right? So there are huge amount of cloud services which are running and which are hosted in the cloud service providers today for enterprise, right? So how to identify the potential security vulnerabilities? What, for example, what if a critical inbound port or outbound port is open for a hacker to hack the systems, right? So these are the key considerations which should be considered when you host your applications, app, or even data in the cloud. And next is on the multi-cloud compliance. So this is one of the very key aspects. This is from a continuous compliance point of view, how to secure your app and data when you're operating in a specific geography, right? So that you are not breaching any compliance issues. And the last is about cloud governance, operations, and IT management. This is very important, basically to have an optimized cost and also to have a very, very secured and optimized cloud services running, which is needed only, right? So these are the key considerations we should have in place for enhancing the cloud security. And the next slide is about the key benefits of using multi-cloud, right? So I'll start from agility. So basically, agility is one of the key area. So where I can achieve agility because I can switch between multiple clouds, right? So for example, I can try with Azure Functions and I can try with AWS Lambda, right? I have that agility to move between multiple clouds, right? And next is basically resilience, right? So I will achieve resilience by protecting enterprises' business critical services through backup and recovery, right? So it's very good. And third is about the flexibility and scalability. So multi-cloud services provides greater flexibility and scalability in terms of I can scale up, I can scale down if I need, or if I want, I can create new compute services on the fly. So I have that flexibility, right? And the next most important point is about the vendor lock-in. So investing in a specific internal product or a platform and having a vendor lock-in will be very difficult for enterprises to operate with. So it is multi-cloud gives the flexibility for you to come out of this vendor lock-in as well, right? And the fifth point is about the innovation. So we can drive innovation by exploring a lot of new tools and services which is provided by the cloud service providers as well. So these are the 5 key benefits in the multi-cloud environment. And that's it. I've done with the presentation. Thanks for your time.